We have lots to discuss in today's video, including some off-season trade talk around the Montreal Canadiens and the New York Rangers. Plus, we have 4 players on NHL waivers today. We have some big milestones to discuss, including another goal for Alex Ovechkin, big milestone as well for Leon Draisaitl and Sidney Crosby. We're going to discuss the playoff race, especially the wild card race in the Eastern and Western Conference. Things are really heating up in several games on the schedule today, having a major impact. Plus, we have an NHL trade involving a key prospect between Carolina and Tampa, and we'll discuss how and why that happened now. We'll get into all that and more coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. As I mentioned, we have lots to discuss in today's video. Let's kick things off first and start with NHL waivers news. We actually have 4 players on NHL waivers here today. I would be likely going to file them a guess here that nobody gets claimed. As I mentioned before, to be eligible to play in the playoffs, you have to be on that playoff team's roster by the NHL trade deadline. That's really the only important aspect of the trade deadline, is that if anybody changes teams after that, they cannot compete in the playoffs if that team is playoff bound. So these players could get picked up by non-playoff teams if they want to have a shot at them for the future, but more than likely they're going to clear and be reassigned to the minors. But the Boston Bruins today have veteran forwards Patrick Brown and Vinny Lettieri on waivers, and the Minnesota Wild have forward Devin Shore and Brendan Gaunce on waivers. So again, 4 players on waivers. They may get picked up, they most likely won't, and they will likely be reassigned to the minor leagues. Now, as I mentioned, we got a bunch of milestones here today. In Pittsburgh today, Pittsburgh versus Ottawa. Ottawa got a back-to-back. The Penguins honored Sidney Crosby for a big milestone as well, hitting the 20th consecutive season where he's going to be guaranteed to have a point per game. So that will break the record by Wayne Gretzky. Of course, today's game between Ottawa and Pittsburgh was a 1-0 overtime win. No goals were scored in regulation. It's a little bit of a snoozer, but the Sens coming on a back-to-back with travel and only 22 hours between start times as well. They didn't even get a full 24 hours. So the Sens by the third especially looked tired. The Penguins, they played okay. Forsberg was really the difference for the Senators today. So it goes to overtime where Crosby gets the overtime winning goal. So, of course, Crosby was the story here today, getting honored. And we'll discuss that game a little further here in a minute when we get into the playoff race, but quite a feat for Crosby. He's the model of consistency, if you will. We also had a big milestone last night. Leon Draisaitl returned to action for the Edmonton Oilers, became the first NHL player this season to hit the 50-goal milestone plateau. Leon scored goals 50 and then in overtime 51 to propel the Oilers to victory. So we probably won't have a lot of as many as 40, 50 goal scores this year as we may have seen recently. I think in a lot of cases scoring is still at a pretty high level, but we're not getting as many guys hitting, the big numbers. We've seen guys like Matthews and Pasternak and stuff, have, or even, other guys too, hit, like 60 or almost 70 goals here. Recently, I don't know anybody's going to get that high this year. We're probably going to be in the 50s, with Leon likely winning the Rocket Richard Trophy. And, of course, the Great 8 chase, as they're calling it, Alex Ovechkin on his chase to become the all-time leader in goals scored during the regular season. Took another one off the notch here today, scoring one more to get down to 5. He needs 5 more goals to break the Great One's record, so 4 will tie it. 5 will beat it. And, of course, the Capitals are, down to those final under 10 games now. Is he going to get it done this season is the big question. I know, like I said, it's kind of become a big thing here, with the Capitals being the top team in the East this year, which I don't think anybody really would have predicted at the beginning of the season. I know for me, I had Washington improving over last year, kind of being in the mix maybe for a wild card. I didn't honestly think they would be even first in the division, let alone first in the conference. I thought that the Metro division would be the Rangers, Devils, and Canes. I'm not necessarily in that order, but those would be your top 3 teams. And then probably the Capitals might be maybe the best of the rest, so to speak. I didn't expect Philly or Pittsburgh or Columbus to have a great season. So yeah, they're surprised, nonetheless here. But the thing that could make this very interesting, just because Ovechkin and Crosby have been so connected throughout their entire careers, and they've done so many battles, and they've always been compared to each other, it's possible that Ovechkin could end up breaking the record against Pittsburgh and in the final game of the season. Washington's last game is against Pittsburgh. So that is something that's been brought up numerous times. It's going to be interesting to see how things play out. If Ovechkin enters that game and the record has not been broken, or if he only needs 1 or 2 goals, then you know he's going to be motivated to finish the season with the record and to do it against one of his biggest longtime rivals. And over the years, they've gained a lot of respect for each other, but I'm sure they still enjoy one-upping each other and having good performances when they do battle. So, Ovechkin gets one step closer to the all-time goal mark. Now, as I mentioned, the playoff race is intensified again here today. We've got lots of games that are impacting the wildcard standings. We know, for the most part, the top 3 spots are, generally in most divisions are pretty well set. We don't know the order because there's a lot of tightness there, but we know the Atlantic is pretty much given to be Toronto, Florida, Tampa. The order could change a little bit, but those are going to be your 3. In the Metro, we know for sure because it's pretty much a given. It's going to be the Capitals, the Canes, and the Devils. And then in the Central, you've got the Jets, the Stars, and the Avalanche. That's pretty much a given. And then in the Pacific, you've got Vegas, LA, and Edmonton. That order could change a little bit, but we don't really think that the wildcard teams that are in those mix right now are going to have a shot at moving up. You never know. It's not completely impossible. Mathematically, it can happen. It's just the odds aren't great. So right now in the East, you've got Ottawa and Montreal in the wildcard spots. Montreal had briefly lost their spot, but they gained it back last night with the Ottawa win over Columbus. That knocked, and then the Rangers had lost too, and they had lost in overtime. So they got Montreal back in, and then Montreal won today. So now they've got a little bit more breathing room. But in the Eastern Conference today, the Sens, they lost, but they picked up a point in overtime. Montreal beat Florida, so that kind of takes the 2 teams that are in the spots and adds more points to their totals, kind of solidify things. The Islanders were in action against the Hurricanes. They end up losing. The Hurricanes had a good lead. The Islanders came back, made it interesting, and then Carolina pulled away again. 5-3 win. The Canes are pretty safe right now. I think they need 1 more point to clinch, where the Islanders are still clawing away, but are kind of slowly running out of racetrack here to get themselves back in. And then the Canucks in the Western Conference lost to the Winnipeg Jets. That was the only game that was really important. Right now in the West, you got Minnesota and St. Louis in those 2 spots. The Blues have been red hot. Now the Flames, to me, are the main team that has a shot at catching St. Louis, but they don't really have any room for error. The Blues have been so good that the Canucks and the Flames now suddenly way on the outside looking in, but the Flames have, I think it's 3 games in hand. They need to win all of them to make it interesting. So we will see what happens, but the only development in the West today was Vancouver losing, so that kind of puts them behind the 8 ball. I don't think that the Canucks really have much of a chance. I think that's kind of slowly slipping away, and that's going to go by the wayside. In the Eastern Conference, the Habs do have the best odds now again, according to MoneyPuck.com. But the Rangers are right there. The Rangers also have played more games, so all the teams around them have at least 1, in some cases 2 games in hand. The Jackets and Islanders are right there. Red Wings won last night, so they're still in the mix too. But looking at teams like the Islanders and the Red Wings, they're now 10 points behind Ottawa for wildcard 1. And then, of course, there's us. But that's the problem. There's not as much of a gap from wildcard 2 down. So I think the Sens are, according to MoneyPuck, 99-point-something% sure to make it. They've only got 1 road game left, 9 games left, 8 are at home. So they're pretty safe, barring an epic collapse. But yeah, the Canadiens right now looking decent for the 2nd spot. They play Florida again on Monday, which is going to be a tough game, or actually on Tuesday, after beating them today. See if they can do it again and gain any breathing room. So as I mentioned, we also have a trade today. And this trade, I'm sure, is kind of going to draw some eyebrows, but I've talked about this a number of times where we talked about a lot of trade rumors. And the offseason is not far away. So a lot of the speculation we're hearing mostly right now is for the offseason. And for half the league, that offseason is coming now in just about 3 weeks. So we're not far away from that. But we did have a trade today involving a prospect between Carolina and Tampa. The Carolina Hurricanes today traded the rights to prospect Lucas Mercury, who was a UMass forward, playing college hockey, 23 years old, 6'3" centerman, Canadian born. Was drafted by the Canes in 2020 in the 6th round. Carolina was not going to be able to sign him. For whatever reason, they knew that they weren't going to get him signed. So they trade him to Tampa, where he is going to get signed. And the Lightning get him his ELC. It'd be, I believe, a 2-year deal. I'm waiting for Tampa. I don't know if Tampa's announced the contract yet. I believe it's going to be 2 years based on his age. But either way, he gets signed by the Lightning, and he can kicks in next year. He can go to the AHL with Syracuse on an amateur tryout and play some games to finish out this year. But that contract's going to start next year, and the reason why is that he's not eligible to play with the Lightning during the playoffs because this is happening after the trade deadline. So as I've talked about numerous times and explained, I feel like I'm kind of running out of breath here, but essentially, trades can happen anytime. You don't really see anything major happen after the deadline before you get to the big part of the offseason. But things like this, trades do happen. It's just the only thing that makes it impactful is that they can't be on the playoff rosters. And that's really all there is to it. So we have a trade with a prospect going from Carolina to Tampa, and he gets signed right away. And then Tampa also signed 21-year-old prospect Connor Kurth. He gets a 2-year ELC as well. He comes from the University of Minnesota, another player from the Minnesota program, turning pro, put up 39 points in 40 games this past year, the forward did. So he had a good season there. Tampa gets a couple extra prospects into their system. A couple quick injury updates tonight for the Ducks, who are playing the Leafs. Jacob Trouba is out of action, out considered day-to-day, nothing too serious. And in Dallas, a fairly good update on Miro Heiskanen, who's dealing with a long-term injury. He has started to skate, which is good, promising, still a ways away. I know head coach Peter DeBoer didn't want to, didn't make it sound like he's coming back tomorrow or anything like that, but the fact that he said that he's starting to skate is very promising. Still has a ways to go, but at least now they're pretty comfortable and fairly confident with around 3 weeks left here in a regular season that he should be okay to play in the playoffs. There was concern he might not be available to start the playoffs or maybe even all of the first round. But at this point, it looks pretty promising. No guarantees, of course, but at least things have progressed to the point that they are starting to gain confidence that he'll be able to come back for the first round. Now, as I mentioned, a few off-season rumor things I want to take a look at. One was Montreal, secondly was the New York Rangers, and we'll start with the Canadiens here tonight. Of course, the other night we talked about a couple of number 2 center trade targets for the Canadiens, and this came from the Montreal Canadiens game broadcast. When I was watching the Habs game on TSN, they had Mark Denis on there, and of course Brian Mudryk and Frankie Corrado, and they were talking about some players that they feel that the Canadiens should target as a trade target for the number 2 center spot. They all agreed that seemed to be the team's biggest weakness, biggest area of focus that it should be in the offseason to improve the team kind of moving forward here. Now, they mentioned a few names. We talked about a couple of them the other night. I focused on more of the guys who had a little bit more experience, mainly Matthew Barzal and to some degree Marco Rossi. His name was brought up as well. We know Rossi in Minnesota has been in and out of the rumor mill, having a good season in Minnesota, but the feeling's always been there for probably about almost the last year that the Wild may end up moving him because we know that it just maybe doesn't fit the prototypical type of player they'd like to have as a top 6 centerman, and it's more of a stylistic thing, a size thing, if they can find a good swap that for like a pure hockey trade, then maybe that happens. I don't know if that would happen with Montreal. Unless they move Kirby Dach, which is possible, but are the Wild going to want to move a player like Rossi, who's been quite productive, for a player like Dach, who's battled a ton of injuries? He's been productive at times, but there's a lot of risk, I think, that comes with them between the health and everything like that. So I don't know. But the other name that came up that I didn't really get into in that video that I want to touch on here is Mason McTavish out of Anaheim. They talked about how the Ducks have a lot of good young, promising prospects. They have guys like Leo Carlson, who's, promising future top centerman. They still have Trevor Zegras. I don't know what his future holds. And of course, they got Cutter Gauthier, who they picked up this year from the Flyers. And there's more coming, right? So if you take a look at what they have in their system, it's possible, I guess they were thinking maybe the Ducks for the right price tag, of course, would consider moving McTavish. He's young, that could grow with this team. He's a big, strong centerman who can play with grit. He would be a different kind of player that they don't have at that position right now. They do have some players that are bigger and stronger. They do have some guys that can play that style of game. They don't have enough of them, in my opinion, and they don't have that, like I said, down the middle. Suzuki, great centerman, good two-way guy, defensively responsible, but he's not an overly big guy. He doesn't play that style of the game. Alex Newhook, he doesn't fit that mold as well. They could use that really down the middle. And McTavish, like I said, he's got good size, plays real gritty, very skilled as well, and becoming also a decent two-way centerman as well. So McTavish might be a very interesting name. If Anaheim were willing to shake him loose to Montreal, they'd have to give up something significant. We're talking about, like I said, you're probably looking at one of their top D prospects, whether it's Reinbacher or Mailloux. You're probably looking at throwing in either a first-rounder or another top prospect. It's not gonna come cheap. McTavish is still young. He was the number 3 overall pick. Played a big role for his junior team. When he was in junior, got to play the Memorial Cup. Came close to winning that. Won obviously with Canada with the World Juniors as well. So he was a great leader in that respect. Like McTavish could be a future captain. I really love this kid and think that he's going to be a terrific player. He's still getting some things figured out, but he's coming along nicely. If the Ducks were to make him available, I think he would be a terrific player for Montreal to target. Now, we've heard a lot about Montreal and Zegras, and maybe they go that route. Like I said, he's a highly skilled player who I think would greatly benefit from a change in scenery. We'll see what happens with his future, but yeah, McTavish might be a different alternate route for them to go down, but it would not come cheaply. Let me know what you think. We talked about Barzal. We talked about Rossi. There's been other options that people think that Ken Hughes should be targeting. Is McTavish maybe the right guy, that young player that they could really target? Yes, it's going to cost you, but it might be worth it in the long run. And lastly, I want to talk about the New York Rangers. The latest reports from Larry Brooks of the New York Post talking about some things we might see from the Rangers in the offseason, as well as talking about what he feels really set this team back this year based on what happened last offseason. So he goes on to say in his latest article about how last offseason we heard from Chris Drury that he wanted to move Jacob Trouba and how things went about, and it did not work out because they never got a deal done, right? We were expecting Trouba to get traded to Detroit. It never happened. I think it screwed the Red Wings over a little bit as well, because you can tell based on some of the moves that Yzerman made that he was clearly setting up for this, and it never happened, right? And then in the Rangers side of things, they had to bring their captain back after all this. I think it made things incredibly awkward in the locker room, incredibly difficult for him to lead and be the captain and do the things he's supposed to do there. And it just made for a disastrous, early part of the season. They finally get Trouba moved, and certainly things have, they've had their ups and downs all year. But it certainly was a distraction, and I don't really think it did the team any good. So the expectation is we know that they're probably going to be going through more change here. The rest of the season hasn't been, excellent. There's still a good possibility they might miss the playoffs. We had heard early in the year as well that it wasn't just Trouba that was on the market, that it was a guy like Chris Kreider as well. And we had heard a lot of rumblings that they could ask Mika Zibanejad to waive his no trade. There was even some talk about Panarin. Not so much that they are unhappy with him per se, but his contract's not far from being expired. Do they want to re-sign him? Should they try to get some good assets back to help for the future? What's the best plan here for New York? We know they have a very antsy, impatient owner, so I don't know if that could dictate how things go here as well. But basically, Brooks is saying that it wouldn't be surprising if Kreider is traded this offseason, or, of course, if the jury goes to Zibanejad and asks him to waive his no trade. He has a no-move clause, I believe it is, right to the end of his contract, which is like another, I think it's 4 years, I believe. I don't have Puckpedia open right in front of me here, but it's a number of years. And he has the clause right to the end. So if he does that, if you're going to talk to any of these veteran guys about waiving and being moved, you need to make sure you get the deal done so that you don't bring that back into the locker room next year. We've already talked about the possibility we might see a coaching change. Is Peter Laviolette's shelf life up at the Rangers? Are we going to see more veterans moved out? And how is Drury going to go about things? We've seen him be very aggressive in some cases to make sure he gets deals done that he wants done, but then other cases where he hasn't been able to. And I can certainly understand, and I do agree with Brooks. I think it was a major distraction, and it certainly brought a negative vibe to that room to start the season. And they can't afford to have that again next year. So if you're going to move Kreider, you're going to move Zibanejad, you're real serious about retooling this team after a disappointing season, if you need to ask them to waive anything, you better make sure you get the trade done and get the move done so that you can not have to deal with that in your room and around your club next season. But expectations are that they're very likely going to make some more changes, according to Brooks, and see that these are some of the top players, including Panarin, who could find himself on the move this offseason. They're probably not going to move all of them, but obviously it could be one or two to really continue shaking things up and to see if they can't retool on the fly here, a little bit like we saw the Capitals do, and try to get back in contention here quickly, because they do have some good pieces there, and they have some guys that are still somewhat in their prime that have the ability to win now. So it doesn't make sense to go into a rebuild. I think it's going to try to be a quick reset here with a few veterans maybe moved out for some different guys. So we'll see what happens. Let me know your thoughts on all of today's news and rumors down in the comments. We'll discuss further. If you're new to the channel, make sure you subscribe and stick around. We'll keep you up to date with all the news, rumors, and analysis of all 32 NHL teams. Thanks for watching. I'll catch you next time.